In this video, we're going to go through the setup for language learning logger. We will delete the data that's in there and add some data of our own. And we'll start getting everything set up so that you can start using it right out of the box and start learning your languages. So the first thing you're going to do when you get the language learning logger is go up to File and select Make a Copy. You're going to make sure that the logger script is being added to, and go at the bottom and select Make a Copy. You probably can't see it on the screen, but select Make a Copy and it'll make a copy inside of your drive that's accessible by only you. So we're going to go through the setup for the language learning logger. Likely you just got your hands on the language learning logger and you are going through setup and trying to get it set up now. We're going to go through each step together and get it ready for you to start learning and putting in your entries. So the first thing you're going to do is when you get the language learning logger, after you make a copy, is you're going to navigate down at the bottom. There are a list of tabs here called Sheets, Settings, Log, etc., so on and so forth. We're going to navigate to the log sheet, and at the top right here we're going to clear data. It's going to ask you for authorization required to run the sheets associated with it. We're going to go ahead and press OK. It's going to pop up with some new Google verification. Choose your account. It'll say that Google hasn't verified this app. That's correct. We haven't gone through all the verifications and checks and everything that Google needs to say that this is a legitimate app. We're just going to go down here to Advanced and go to Language Learning Logger Scripts. Now it'll give you a list of things that it takes. All we do is take your email address to send the email back to yourself as you for later functionality for weekly reports, and that's about it. So we're going to go ahead down here and press continue. It'll make sure that you want to do the things that you're doing. We're going to go down here and press the box for select all. It will allow this script to seek, edit, create, and delete all your Google Sheets spreadsheets, send the email as you, like I mentioned, and then display and run the third-party web content in prompts and sidebars inside of Google applications, meaning that is for the guide inside of the Google spreadsheet, which you may have seen in the other videos. That's all the script does. So we're going to go ahead down here and press continue. So what happens is the button script that we just allowed has deleted all of the default data in here so that we can start with a clean slate. Now the second thing we're going to do is we're going to go down here to Settings, and we're going to navigate and start messing with our settings and getting it set up. So this part of the video we're going to go through the settings and set it up together. I'm going to explain in as much detail as I can all of the functionality so that you know what it is. If you do not need to go through the settings yourself, you can do it and then refer to this video if you need extra help. There are instructions and drop-down boxes, or I'm sorry, tooltip boxes for your reference if you need some help or pointers. And on the left side, there are color-coded numbers for each instruction section that indicate the value. For example, over here, blue is optional, green is satisfied, meaning it has what it needs to allow the logger to run. And then red is empty or needs some other type of value in it for that section to be satisfied. And the red ones especially need something inside of them in order for the entire logger to work. But these will change colors and help guide you through the settings. It's not too complicated, but if you use the default data in there, for the most part, you should be good to go. There are instructions explaining to you what they all do and how to change them to your liking so that you can create a logger that's exactly for you and your language learning. But we're going to start going through it right now. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is input your name. So this could be a nickname, it could be your first name. It's only used for aesthetic purposes. It's not too important. It is optional. If you leave it blank, then it won't affect anything. The second thing you're going to do is set your languages. Now, these obviously is the most important thing. It's a language learning logger. So we have a list of languages here as the drop down. Most languages that people learn are on this list. You can type it in. If I want to learn Italian, if I want to learn Persian, Fijian, something, anything you want, it will be on here most likely. If it is not, you can type it in and add your own. There are country flags if you want to use flags with it. It's for aesthetic purposes, not too big of a deal. For example, this one doesn't have a flag. You can add up to 10 languages, and the logger will add accommodate functionality for all 10 languages. There's an option down here that you can use country flags with language names on the sheet titles. That's some people don't believe in using a flag for languages. That's purely ethical. It's up to you. All it does is show the flag on the sheet in different places. You can check it. It's a checkbox right here. One thing I forgot to mention is all the input boxes are in this color, a grayish white. That's the only places that you put your own information in. Everything else is, for the most part, automatic formulas, so only edit the boxes that are this color. Moving on to section 4. This one is satisfied. I have the language name, level names in here. This is where you edit the language, the level names, the proficiency names. We have default starting names, A0, A1, A2, B1, so on and so forth. Now in here you can manually override the required hours for each level. So what this does is this lets you change the amount of hours needed to reach that level. For example, for right now, since on my other sheet, Persian is the selected language, current language that we're seeing the data for. Persian, we need 90 hours in order to become the A1 elementary level. You can override this. Let's say, this is not realistic, but let's just say 500 hours. It will change the current hours required to be an A1 level is 500 hours now. It overrode that. You can change it for every language that you select in the previous step. We're going to take that off and just stick with the defaults. Every language has its own defaults according to the index, the US government's index of difficult languages to learn according to an English speaker. You can, again, change all of these yourself. The next step we're going to do is choose your yearly hour goal. This is just the number of hours you would like to reach every year. So for example, I would like to study for 750 hours in my languages a year. This just adds a little progress bar to the stats sheet. Nothing too big, it's optional. Next one is defining your language starting levels. This is also optional. If you begin using this logger when you've already been studying for a certain amount of times, for example, if you're already fluent in Japanese, or maybe you're at a B1 level or whatever, this drop down will dynamically change according to the levels that you picked in the previous steps. If you're already a B1 in Japanese, you can select it, and what it'll do is it'll add, there's a typo here, it will automatically add those hours or put you at that level prior to beginning adding the data into the sheet. So it won't say that you're starting from the beginning. It'll say you're starting from whatever level you chose and update accordingly. We're going to leave that into Fluent for now. But if you do not want to start at any level and you're starting from nothing and you're starting with a logger from the beginning, which is how I suggest someone uses this logger, then you can just leave it blank. The next step on 7 is defining some of your levels. So this is just to, however you name your proficiency levels, this is just to make sure that everything is consistent. Just what do you consider to be a fluent level, proficient level, and native level. It's the drop down again. You decide. And this is a required section. It's just been satisfied. For example, if I get rid of all of these or one of these, it will turn red. That means it's missing one part. Please input. So the next one is add predetermined language level hours from level sheet to the stat sheet hour counter 2. So what this does is it adds if you selected a starting language in section 6, it's asking, do you want to add these hours to the stat sheet hours right here? Do you want it to display right here? Or do you only want the hours shown here that you've learned with the logger itself? Now that's up to you. Some people don't like that. Some people want everything to reflect inside of the stat sheet. We're going to leave that off. Hide future progress beyond the next level on the level sheet. Now on the level sheet, if you navigate down there, we have these locks right here. All this does is this hides the future levels so that you can't see their total hours needed and hours remaining, so that you don't get anxiety or obsess over it or say, oh my gosh, I need 3,000 more hours in order to reach my goal. That's so many, I'm losing motivation. That's just to prevent this. It's just to trick the mind. Your preference. If you get rid of that, these locks will disappear and it'll show everything. Assessments required to graduate levels. Now the cool thing about this logger is we can state that it requires, every level requires an assessment, or certain levels require an assessment in order to graduate to that level. For example, if I am an elementary level and I have enough hours, if intermediate requires 500 hours and I reach 501 hours, well, technically, according to this, I would be an intermediate level. If this requires 500 hours, so on and so forth. But if this assessment setting is checked for that level and that language, you will be required to input a log entry under that language. For example, Japanese, assessment, the date, the duration, whatever, all this stuff. It just adds it into the graphing and stuff. And checkbox this progress made. What that does is this tells the logger that, oh, you finished an assessment for Japanese. So that will add one assessment to the list of assessments that you need. So according to this, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assessments. So that completes the first assessment, which is for elementary level. So you graduated from A0, got the hours for A1, took an assessment, passed because you selected progress made in the log, and it will allow you to graduate to the A1 level. But you will need to do the same thing again for these following assessment levels. Now, if you don't do a checkbox for that level, it won't require you to do an assessment. It will just let you graduate naturally once you get the hours for this level. You can leave them blank and it will progress naturally without the need of assessments. You can see your list of assessments through the levels sheet right here. It will say need an assessment on the right side for that level. Obviously right now I don't have any hours. It has 0 hours. Once I get to 90, this will say achieved, but it won't let me graduate. Right now the green part is saying what level you are. It won't graduate until you take an assessment. Once you take an assessment, it'll tell you the date that you took the assessment and allow you to graduate naturally. Moving on to section 11, set your milestone rewards for each language. Now, this is purely up to you. I don't have anything set for Japanese. For Persian, for example, if I go to, it's already on the Persian. If I go to milestones, it has a list of everything you inputted for your milestone rewards. These are rewards you get when you study. For example, right here, these are also, you can also change the values here in the settings later, but it tells you every 2 hours of study, you'll get 1 point. A certain number of points are required in order for you to reach this milestone reward. These rewards you determine whatever you want to keep you motivated. It'll tell you the amounts of points needed, remaining, and roughly how many hours it'll take to get there. So the settings inside of section 11 is just changing the names of them. Now, the next one is where you edit how many hours it takes to get there to get 1 point. For example, if you look on the right side, it'll tell you roughly what you input and what it means. So if you put for the standard rate 2 hours, it means every 2 hours of study is 1 point. If I put 4 hours, it'll now say every 4 hours of study will equal 1 point. So you can change these according to that. On 12.4, there's the number of steps. So right now 54 points are needed for the first milestone. And then 74 for the second, 94 for the third, etc. If I change this to a higher step, let's say 50. Now you need 78 points needed for the first milestone, 105 for the second. It just makes it harder to get points and get rewards. So whatever frequency you want to be rewarded, you can change the steps here. If you want it to be easier, just make it less steps. So now it's only 16 points for the first milestone, which makes all of your rewards happen very quickly. Right now, the default is 35. So next one is hide feature rewards and milestones. Same thing as the previous one. If you check this box, everything will appear with the lock. So in milestones sheet, you have locks here. If you uncheck it, these will go away and you can see how many points are still needed for all of these rewards. Again, if you don't like to see that far ahead and that you obsess about it or it causes anxiety, you can hide them. It's purely aesthetic and up to you. Next one, section 14, SRS repetitions milestone award points. Now, a lot of people do SRS flashcard reviews, such as me when I study languages. You can determine how many repetitions earns you 1 point. For example, if you go through 450 flashcards, you get 1 point. You can change this number, so every 700 flashcard reps will equal 1 point. Or if you just don't want to use flashcard reps at all to award points, you can just unselect it and the checkbox and it'll go away and it won't be a thing. But we're going to leave that to the default 450. And the next part is really complicated and important. The main thing that you need to know here is these are defaults. These are the most common activities. So an activity is a thing you engage in order to learn your languages, whether it's shadowing, listening to music, doing conversation, general writing, etc., so on and so forth. You can add your own at the box here, at the bottom here, in these boxes. I don't recommend, unless you know what you're doing, to delete any of this data. What this data is is this will change the study plan information. If you know what you're doing and you can read through it and take the time, you can edit it yourself, but I don't recommend editing the ones that are already here. You can add new ones in the same way as this once you understand it in these boxes below for your own activities. But there are most of the activities that people engage in order to learn languages already here. If you're unsure, you can always send an email and ask for some support or guidance on this section. Moving on to 16, which is your setting your activity types themselves. Now, these are basically just activity languages. I apologize. Activity families. These will tell you every activity has an activity type. The normal ones are passive listening, active listening, etc., etc. Don't delete these first two. These are important for the functionality of the sheet. Everything else you can change the names of. You can add about 3 or 4 per section, so listening, reading, writing, speaking. And then over here, you can determine which ones are your passive types. So which ones do you do without actively studying? You can determine which of these will change. This list will change dynamically depending on what you put here. These are already pre-selected because these are the defaults for the functionality. Section 18 is the SRS flashcard activity. So whatever you determine to be your SRS flashcard activity, you input it right here from your list of activities. Section 19 is a little bit more complicated, but it's a really cool feature that is implemented in the language learning logger to make it feel more realistic and true to the data that you input. So what we have in the logger is called the passive activity type diminishing return modifier. So it's what we call a diminishing law. It applies specifically to passive study activities. So passive listening or passive reading or whatever you determine to be your passive types in the previous section. The more time that you spend passively exposed to a language, the smaller the benefits will be. So if you spend 500 hours learning a language passively, listening to music or listening to podcasts or TV shows or whatever you do in the background, at first, listening and getting used to the language and the sounds might be very, very beneficial to your language learning when you're early in the early levels of the language. But as you approach the later stages of learning and you've listened to 5,000 hours or 1,000 hours or whatever, the benefits of that passive listening is going to go down drastically according to these settings. So this helps you keep your hours from being bloated with data and hours that don't actually reflect your true skill because of these passive listening hours. You could be listening and immersing yourself in language all the time through music and podcasts and the like, but that doesn't mean that you can speak full languages, full conversations and things with your partners. It's just not realistic. So this helps offset that and create a more realistic representation of your language abilities. So we have fatigue exponent, the K value. This determines how quickly study efficiency declines once you reach the daily study threshold. If you study for 50 minutes a day and that's your study threshold, that value of your 50 minutes is going to go down. So if you study for 150 minutes, that 100 minutes is possibly only going to be counted for 25% or whatever you determine. The diminishing law exponent controls the rate at which additional passive study yields progressively smaller benefits. So more means less, less means more. diminishing law minimum is the lowest possible multiplier for passive study. So let's say that you study for, that if you study for 60 minutes, your threshold's at 60 minutes, and you study for 120 minutes of passive listening, it will never go down. It'll never count for less than that 25%. So if you study for 120 minutes, it's going to count for at least 15 minutes towards your total hours spent studying. And you can determine the threshold down there. So that's in a nutshell what that does to make it more realistic. And I think that's a really cool feature to have. That makes this feel a lot more real and live. The next section, section 20, is what types of activities do you want to exclude from streaks? So if you don't want on the stats sheet here, we have streaks. Now it's just another way of gamifying. Right now we don't have any data in here, so it's just showing random, no data, etc., etc. But this will appear current streak, longest streak. It'll have some stuff down here to follow for your streaks. But what this essentially does is, if you don't want a certain activity to count towards your streak, you can exclude it here. Or you can have a minimum duration. So passive listening will only count towards your streak. So if you do only passive listening that day and you don't put a minimum, it won't count towards your streak. It won't add to your streak counter. You have to do a different activity that's not in this exclusion list. But if you have a minimum on here, it means you have to do at least 90 minutes of that activity type in order for it to count towards your streaks. Same thing here. Which type of activities to exclude from levels? Same thing, but for the levels sheet. So if you don't want certain activity types to count towards these level hours, which might be different here than on your stat sheet, then you can exclude them right here, so they don't count towards you graduating your levels. Right now it's passive listening, passive reading. So the next section, section 22, is minimum duration for streak-worthy activities. So the minimum duration for streak-worthy activities right now in default is 20 minutes. So you have to do at least 20 minutes of speaking in order for it to count towards your streaks. So if it's 19 minutes or 15 minutes, it won't count towards your streak for the day if that's the only activity you do. It won't raise the streak counter and might break your streak. If you leave it blank, then there is no minimum and any duration will work. Streak reward rate. So this is this controls how many points you get for each streak interval. So the interval threshold right now is 15 days. So every 15 days, you'll get 2 points. And it'll have an explanation of the formula right here automatically, dynamically to show you. Next one, set your passive active ratio. So what this does is it show roughly, in your opinion, what is the ratio of your time studied. So do you spend most of your time passively studying, listening? Are most of your entries in your log passive or active? Now, what this does is it really, again, it's another offset for your hours to make it more realistic and not bloat your hours full of passive or etc. things that don't actually reflect your true language level. This is ballpark of, on a scale of 10, what is the amount of passive input that you get versus your active, which is an explanation right here. Set your dead time. Again, there's another check to hopefully make this more realistic. Now, dead time is the amount of time that you spend not actually studying. So you put an entry for 60 minutes, for example, of, let's say you're writing a journal in your language that you're studying. Now, there's sometimes you're putting your pencil down and flexing your hand, not thinking. Someone talks to you. You have to go to the bathroom. You take a drink. You shut a window. All of that adds up to maybe 3 minutes. That's 3 minutes of things that you're not actually studying. So it's not actually time that you went towards your language learning. Now, you can set a percentage of dead time of basically what percentage of your entries are not actually spent learning, so that you don't have to think about that as you input them in the log sheet. So this will subtract 5% from your entries. For example, if I put a log entry of 60 minutes in there for journal writing, it'll take 5% away from that, so it only counts 57 minutes towards your total logged time on your hours. Now, if you leave it blank, then it won't take anything away and it will count for full credit. Another thing, the next section is section 26. Another really cool thing is fatigue. Now, fatigue is if you study too much time in a day, in most people, unless you're Superman, your ability to focus longer will decline drastically. Now, this is, again, true to life variable that affects your hours, that we wanted to try to make this as realistic as possible. This will help you offset the possibility that you're getting more distracted, kind of like your dead time, but this one is a lot more drastic. So on the settings, on the first setting, 180 minutes is the fatigue threshold. Now, the fatigue threshold means that after 180 minutes, which is 3 hours, it will incur a fatigue. Now, you can see your fatigue on the stats here. There's a bar right here under the stats, a really thin bar. You'll see it as you study every day. It's your progress to, oops, not that one, the one right below it. The fatigue bar, it will tell you how close you are to meeting your fatigue, meeting that 180 minutes. It will also have some conditions down here if you've met your fatigue, and it'll also tell you right here if you're reaching it or close to reaching it or have reached it. But what this does is after 180 minutes, your entries for studying will count for far less. Now you can control how much this will chop off that time of your time studied after that fatigue threshold down here. It will exponentially increase the fatigue this much, 8%. Or not 8%, but at a rate of 0.8 after that minute. So you just play with it and see what you prefer, how it affects your entries and input hours. The next setting's cool because it's a global fatigue option. So what happens is if I uncheck this, it'll tell you this is a language specific. So fatigue will only be counted by language. So it doesn't matter how many languages you study in a day. It only counts per language. So if I study Japanese 180 minutes in Japanese and meet my fatigue, I can be like, okay, I'm done studying Japanese today. Let's move on to Russian. And then I start all over again, those 180 minutes. So fatigue won't go across all languages. It's only language specific. Now, if I check this box, this means it's all languages will be accounting this fatigue. So if I study for 60 minutes in Japanese and the rest of it in Russian and then go over that time, it will count for fatigue, even though they're different languages. Now that's up to you if you want global or to be language specific, but true to life, it would be global. Passive activities excluded. Now, it's not an active activity. Passive activities, you're just listening to music or podcasts. It doesn't count towards your fatigue if you have this box checked. If you uncheck it, then your passive activities will also count towards your fatigue. You're going to hit that fatigue much faster. You're not tending to actively listen to stuff that's passive, obviously. So more true to life is to have this checkbox checked. The next section, section 27, is your challenges for each language. Now these are, again, your preferences and what if you want some challenges, you can always add them later as you come across new materials. For example, in Persian, we have the Modern Persian textbook, Chai and Conversation podcast lessons, Rosetta Stone lessons, Pimsleur lessons, watch 12 movies, whatever you want to do. Now, you have the additional option to display them as completion or by hour. So if it's a checked, it's displaying it as a completion goal, challenge. So if I go to the challenges tab, you'll see all of these for Persian. Now you'll see 0 out of 30 completed. Now, if for Chai and Conversation, I, just an example, put it as hours, not as progress. So if you go to Chai and Conversation, it's unchecked. That means you need 150 hours, not tasks, in order to meet this challenge. These other ones are tasks because these are checked. So if you go back to the challenges, you'll see 30 tasks remaining, 150 hours remaining, etc., so on and so forth. And you can do this by language in the columns here. Next section, 28, is milestone award points. So you can determine how many points for every challenge completed. So if for every one challenge completed, I will get 5 points towards my milestones rewards. You can set this to however, whatever amount that you want, and it'll dynamically update. Next one is your daily study time, the amount of time you would be willing to actively study per day. Now, this is all your study plan section. Super simple. This is the amount of time that you're willing to study per day, and it will update your study plan preferences up here and give you time goals for your study plan. This is only for your study plan. It affects nothing else. Just input how many hours you're willing to actively study, or how many minutes you're actively studying for each language, and it will affect that. Preferred study focus is your study type. That's listed. If you need some pointers, it's listed in the guide that we went over in a different video. You can choose what kind of study focus you want to do for each language with the drop downs. The next one is your custom weight. So you can optionally assign a custom percentage weight to each active activity type. So these apply to across all study focuses. Just be aware that if you do this, you have to make sure that these all add up to 100. So math is required here on your own. But this will change the study plan time suggestions that it gives you. Again, if you leave it blank, it will do it by default, whatever the defaults are. But if you really want to change the weights, you can with these boxes, and these are by language. So this column is Japanese, this column is Japanese, this one's Persian, Spanish, etc., so on and so forth. More columns will be added if you have more languages than that. Same thing for custom weights for your passive activity types. And then for your custom dive-in multipliers, if you want your dive-in multiplier on your study plan to count for more, or get not count for more, but see how the times are different here. Dive-in are really on the weekends or something where you do once a week or spread out throughout the week. It has more time that it wants you to study for. This is giving you suggestions here. If you want that to be more, you can input your own values here, your dive-in multipliers. This is the minimum duration for a particular activity type, the maximum, etc., and so on and so forth. And that would be the end of the settings per the 1.3 version. Most of these are already pretty well set for the defaults, but just a few things here and there to make it your own will be required. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send a message or email or see our Discord and open a ticket. People are willing to help you, and I would be more than happy to create the language logger that you really are looking for.